Gunfire ripped through the Wyoming air. Sarah Fleming collapsed to her knees, her wedding dress billowing in the dust of Clearwater Station. The bullet hadn't struck her, a drunken cowboy had fired skyward, but the sound shattered what remained of her composure. 3 days of humiliation, of whispers and cruel laughter, had worn her down to this breaking point. Her hands clutched at the dirt as tears carved the paths through the dust on her cheeks. "Get up," a gruff voice commanded from behind. "Station ain't no place for crying." Sarah looked up, meeting the station master's cold eyes, the same man who'd watched her arrive full of hope, only to be abandoned at the altar. Before he could grab her arm, a shadow fell between them. The station master froze, looking up into the stern face of a Native American man astride a paint horse. The rider's weathered features had been carved by decades under a merciless sun. His black hair, streaked with silver, was tied back with leather. But it was his eyes that made the station master retreat, dark, penetrating eyes that had witnessed more death than most could bear. "The woman stays." The rider said his English clear but accented. "She has paid for shelter." "Swift Owl, you got no say in station business." The station master's face flushed crimson. "I have say in matters of respect." Swift Owl didn't blink. "Count your money again. It brings you more joy than decency." As the station master retreated, Swift Owl extended his hand to Sarah. She hesitated, studying this stranger who had intervened on her behalf. His face revealed nothing, but something in those eyes spoke of an understanding she hadn't encountered since arriving in this godforsaken town. "Why help me?" she whispered, accepting his hand. Swift Owl dismounted, his movements fluid despite his 50 years. "Your eyes. They belong to those who have lost more than others can understand." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. This stranger had seen in moments what Herbert Crawford and his family had refused to acknowledge in months of correspondence: her humanity. "They're saying I'm to be put on the next train east," she managed. "Who says this?" "The Crawfords. Herbert wrote to me for a year." She laughed bitterly. "Said he needed a wife with experience. I thought he meant my age was an asset. I was wrong." Swift Owl's eyes narrowed slightly. "And this man, he stood with his family against you. Herbert wasn't even here when I arrived. His mother met the stage, instead took one look at me and declared there had been a misunderstanding." Her voice hardened. "It was only later I learned the truth. The family's business is failing. They needed my savings, everything I had, after selling my boarding house in Boston." Swift Owl was silent for a long moment. "My people say, the greatest thief steals not gold, but hope." Something in his tone made Sarah look more closely. She saw what she had missed before, a sorrow that mirrored her own, buried deep but never fully healed. "You've lost someone," she said quietly. His eyes snapped back to hers. "My daughter, 5 summers ago. She would have been near your age now." The station door banged open. The station master emerged with a well-dressed man whose expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as someone of importance. "That's her Mayor Crawford," the station master said. Mayor Crawford, Herbert's father, strode forward, his face a mask of righteous indignation performed for witnesses. "Miss Fleming," he said coldly, "I've arranged passage for you on tomorrow's eastbound train. Your presence is causing distress to my family. My son was quite specific about requiring a younger bride capable of providing heirs." Sarah's cheeks burned. "Misrepresentation. I have every letter your son sent me. He knew my age. He knew my circumstances. A desperate woman's fabrications." The mayor sneered. "Show me these letters." Swift Owl interrupted. Mayor Crawford turned, as if noticing him for the first time. "This doesn't concern you, Indian." Swift Owl did not respond to the insult. He merely held the mayor's gaze until the older man looked away first. "The letters are in my trunk." Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "Bring them," Swift Owl said. "Words written in a man's hand cannot lie as easily as his tongue." An hour later, Sarah sat with her trunk open beside her. Swift Owl read the letters, his expression darkening with each page. He promised marriage. Swift Owl said finally. He spoke of children you would raise together. Yes, Sarah said quietly. I told him I had lost a child years ago. The doctors said I might never conceive again. He wrote that it didn't matter that there were many children in need of homes in the West. Her fingers drifted to a small dress folded among her belongings, a child's dress that had never been worn. It was that kindness that made me trust him. Swift Owl's eyes followed her hands. Something shifted in his face, a recognition of shared pain. The Crawfords opened your trunk, he observed. Yes. When they found this, she touched the child's dress. Mrs. Crawford laughed, called me pathetic for carrying around a reminder of what I could never have. Swift Owl reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew an object wrapped in soft deerskin. He unwrapped it to reveal a tiny moccasin, exquisitely beaded, but never worn. My wife made these for our daughter's first child, he said quietly. She died before she could fill them. Some griefs we carry always. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of recognition. In this man's face, she saw understanding that had been absent from every interaction since her arrival in Clearwater. What happened to her? She asked gently. Swift Owl's face hardened. Bandits. Men who raid across territories. They attacked her wagon as she traveled to meet her husband's family. By the time word reached us, he shook his head. There was nothing left but vengeance. The sun was beginning to set. Swift Owl stood his decision made. You cannot stay here. The Crawfords have too much power in this town. I have nowhere else to go, Sarah admitted. My money, my home, everything is gone. Swift Owl considered her. My sister's husband died 2 winters ago. She needs help with her trading post. It is not a life of luxury, but it is honest work among people who will not judge you for wounds you carry. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. Why help a stranger? Swift Owl looked toward the distant mountains, their peaks gilded with the day's last light. There are no strangers in grief, only fellow travelers. He turned back to her. Rest tonight. I will return at dawn to escort you. As Swift Owl rode away, felt something shift within her, a sense that perhaps the end of one journey might be the beginning of another she had never imagined. But in the shadowed canyons beyond Clearwater, a man named Caleb Voss studied a crude map by firelight, his scarred face illuminated by the flames, as he planned a raid that would ensnare both Sarah and Swift Owl in a web of violence neither had foreseen. Night fell over Clearwater like a shroud. Sarah lay sleepless on her narrow bed, replaying the day's events and anticipating tomorrow's departure with Swift Owl. Something in his eyes had spoken to her more honestly than all of Herbert Crawford's flowery letters ever had. A soft, scraping sound outside her window interrupted her thoughts. Sarah sat up, straining to hear through the darkness. The noise came again, deliberate, stealthy. Her heart pounded. Years of running a boarding house in Boston had taught her to distinguish between ordinary nighttime sounds and those that signaled danger. The window latch rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Sarah grabbed the heavy oil lamp from the bedside table, its brass base cool against her palm. If someone was breaking in, they would find her ready. The window slid open. A shadow darkened the opening, a man easing himself through the narrow space. Stop right there, Sarah hissed, raising the lamp. I'll scream and bring the whole town down on you. The figure paused, then chuckled a low, menacing sound that sent ice through Sarah's veins. Scream all you want, lady, a rough voice replied. Ain't nobody gonna hear you, or if they do, they ain't gonna care. The man climbed fully through the window, followed quickly by a second. In the dim moonlight, Sarah could make out little more than their outlines, broad-shouldered men with bandanas pulled up over the lower halves of their faces. What do you want? Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Word is you brought a fortune west to marry old Crawford's boy. Sarah backed away, the lamp still raised. Then you heard wrong. The Crawfords took everything I had. The second man spat on the floor. That's not how Mayor Crawford tells it. He sent you, she whispered, to frighten me into leaving. The men exchanged glances that told Sarah she was wrong, and this was something else entirely. Don't matter who sent us, the first man said. What matters is you're coming with us. Our boss wants a word with you about that fortune. There is no fortune. Sarah's back hit the wall. Then I guess you better hope someone's willing to pay to get you back. Sarah knew screaming wouldn't save her. It would only make things worse. Instead, she hurled the lamp with all her strength. It struck the first man squarely, oil splashing across his face and chest as the glass shattered. He howled in pain, staggering backward. Sarah lunged for the door, but the second man caught her around the waist. She fought furiously, kicking and clawing, but he was too strong. A rough hand clamped over her mouth. You'll pay for that. The first man snarled, wiping oil from his eyes. Voss said to bring you unhurt, but he didn't say nothing about teaching you some manners first. No time. The second man grunted. Someone might have heard. Grab her trunk and let's go. They bound her hands and gagged her. As one man hoisted her over his shoulder, the other grabbed her trunk, and the trunk containing the last fragments of her old life, including the child's dress she had sewn so long ago, and the letters that proved Herbert Crawford's treachery. They carried her into the night, to horses waiting in the shadows. The moon disappeared behind clouds, leaving the world in darkness. As they rode out of Clearwater, Sarah bouncing painfully across a saddle, she wondered if Swift Owl would come for her as promised, only to find her gone. Swift Owl knelt by the creek at first light, washing his face in the cold, clear water flowing down from the mountains. Behind him, his small camp was already being dismantled by two young Shoshone warriors, White Fox and Running River brothers, who had insisted on accompanying him. The town will not like you bringing her to our lands, White Fox said, securing a bundle to his horse. At 25, he was the younger of the two, his face still unlined, his manner more impetuous than his brother's. The town has already rejected her. Swift Owl replied, his voice edged with contempt. And she will not be on our lands. My sister's trading post sits on land the government calls public. Still. Running River interjected, it invites trouble. Swift Owl stood turning to face the brothers. Would you have me leave her to their cruelty? She has lost everything. The brothers exchanged glances. They knew the real reason behind Swift Owl's intervention, the shadow that had haunted him since his daughter's death. In Sarah's plight, he saw echoes of Morning Star's final days. We follow where you lead, Running River said finally. As they rode toward Clearwater, Swift Owl's thoughts turned to Sarah Fleming. There had been strength in her eyes, despite her tears, a resilience that reminded him of his late wife. Eagle Feather would have approved of his decision to help this woman. She had always seen beyond the boundaries of tribe and race. The sun was just clearing the eastern hills when they reached Clearwater. Even from a distance, Swift Owl sensed something was wrong. There was unusual activity around the station, people gathering, pointing, talking in clusters. Trouble, White Fox murmured, his hand drifting to the knife at his belt. Swift Owl raised a hand for caution. As they drew closer, he could make out the station master gesticulating to a man wearing a silver star, the sheriff, while townspeople looked on. Broke in through the window, the station master was saying. Took her and all her belongings, left a right mess behind. The sheriff scratched his beard. And you're sure it wasn't just her skipping out on the bill? With an oil lamp smashed all over the floor, blood on the windowsill, the woman was taken. Swift Owl's heart clenched. He urged his horse forward, ignoring the hostile stares. Now what has happened to Sarah Fleming? He demanded, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet station yard. The sheriff turned his hand, moving to rest on his pistol. This doesn't concern you, Swift Owl, I ask again. Swift Owl said with an edge of steel beneath his words. What has happened to Sarah Fleming? The station master stepped forward. Someone broke into her room last night. Took her and her belongings. Oh, convenient, Swift Owl replied coldly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Yesterday, Mayor Crawford threatened to remove her from town. Today, she's gone. A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff's face darkened. You're accusing the mayor of kidnapping. That's a serious charge. I state facts. The woman was abandoned by Herbert Crawford. She threatened to show letters proving his deception. Now she is gone. Oh, now see here. The station master blustered. Just because you took a shine to the woman doesn't mean... He fell silent as White Fox and Running River flanked Swift Owl. Though none made threatening moves, their presence changed the dynamic. I want to see her room, Swift Owl said. The sheriff hesitated, then shrugged. Fine. Maybe your tracking skills can tell us something we missed. The room told its own story. The shattered lamp. Signs of struggle. Blood not much, but enough to indicate someone had been injured. Most telling was the absence of Sarah's trunk and the way the window had been forced from outside. Swift Owl knelt by the window examining the ground. Boot prints at least 2 different men heavy set by the impression depth. And there caught on a nail, a thread of blue fabric. The men wore blue bandanas, he said standing. 2 of them. They carried her to horses waiting behind the station. The sheriff looked skeptical but followed as Swift Owl led the way outside. There in the dirt were the clear tracks of 3 horses, 2 carrying the weight of 2 riders each. They headed west. Swift Owl said, studying the trail. Toward canyon country. The sheriff's skepticism gave way to reluctant respect. That's Voss territory. A chill ran through Swift Owl at the name. Caleb Voss, bandit murderer, and the man rumored to have led the raid that killed his daughter. You know this man? He asked the sheriff. The lawman spat into the dirt. Half the sheriffs in the territory have standing orders to shoot him on sight. Voss and his gang hit stagecoaches, trains, lone travelers, anything they can rob without facing too much resistance. Why would they take Sarah Fleming? A new voice joined the conversation, cold and unmistakably belonging to Mayor Crawford. Perhaps because they heard she was wealthy. All heads turned to see the mayor approaching his expression, a careful mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. A terrible business, he continued. We may have had our differences, but I wouldn't wish such a fate on any woman. Swift Owl studied the mayor's face. Strange that bandits would know of her supposed wealth when she arrived only 3 days ago. Mayor Crawford's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. News travels fast in small towns, as does treachery. The 2 men stared at each other, the tension palpable. Well, the sheriff interjected uncomfortably, nothing to be done now but organize a posse. Though if they've reached the canyons already, you will not pursue them. Swift Owl asked, though he already knew the answer. The sheriff looked ashamed. Voss has 30 men in those canyons, all armed to the teeth. A posse would be riding to their deaths, so you will abandon her to her fate. Now see here, the mayor began. Swift Owl turned to him, his face cold as winter. Was this your plan, to have her taken to ensure she could never speak against your son? Mayor Crawford's face flushed red. How dare you? I will find Sarah Fleming. Swift Owl cut him off. And when I return with her, the truth will be known to all. He strode to his horse White Fox and Running River, following silently. As they mounted, the sheriff called after them. You're making a mistake. Voss will kill you all. Swift Owl did not reply. As they rode out of Clearwater, following Sarah's abductor's tracks, White Fox moved alongside him. We cannot face Voss's entire gang with just 3 warriors, he said quietly. No. Swift Owl agreed, his eyes fixed on the distant canyons. We need more. We ride to gather the others. By midday, they had reached the Shoshone encampment, nestled in a hidden valley. News of Sarah's abduction spread quickly, and by nightfall, 12 warriors had volunteered to join the rescue party. Many had lost family members to Voss's raids over the years. All knew the danger they would face. That night, Swift Owl performed the ritual he had observed before every battle since his youth, a prayer to the spirits for guidance and protection. Behind him, he sensed rather than heard the approach of Greyhawk, the oldest of the volunteers. At 65, his fighting days should have been over, but his skill with a bow remained unmatched. "The young men say you risk all this for a white woman," Greyhawk said, settling beside him. "They wonder if grief has clouded your judgment." "What do you think, old friend?" Greyhawk's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "I think the color of the woman's skin matters less than the darkness of the deed done against her." At the mention of his daughter, Swift Owl closed his eyes briefly. "When I looked into Sarah Fleming's eyes, I saw the same pain that has lived in mine these 5 years. She lost a child as I lost mine. Now she too will know the terror of captivity." "Unless we reach her in time," Greyhawk said. "Yes." Swift Owl opened his eyes, his gaze returning to the star-filled sky. "The difference is that my daughter died alone with no one coming to save her. Sarah Fleming will not share that fate. I swear it by the spirits of our ancestors." Sarah's head throbbed with each jolt of the horse beneath her. They had been riding for hours through the night and into the morning, with only brief stops to rest the animals. Her captors had removed her gag, but kept her hands bound, securing her to the saddle so she couldn't throw herself off. "Water," she croaked to the man leading her horse, Jenks she'd learned. "Please." Jenks glanced back, his face half hidden by the blue bandana. After a moment's consideration, he passed her a canteen. "Don't get used to kindness," he warned as she drank. "Boss ain't nearly as obliging as me." Sarah studied him. Despite his rough exterior, something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with their mission. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Whatever you've been told about my wealth, it's a lie." Jenks reclaimed the canteen, his expression hardening. "Save your stories. I get paid to bring you in, not listen to your troubles." "Paid by whom?" "You'll meet him soon enough." They crested a rise, and Sarah gasped. Before them stretched a vast network of sandstone canyons, golden red and orange rock formations carved by millennia of wind and water into a maze of sheer cliffs, narrow passages, and towering spires. "Welcome to your new home," Jenks said with a humorless laugh. "Least until someone pays to get you back or the boss tires of waiting." They descended into the canyons, following paths that would have been invisible to untrained eyes. Twice they passed lookouts, who nodded to Jenks and his companion Darrell. The deeper they went, the more Sarah's hope of escape diminished. Finally, they emerged into a wider canyon where crude structures had been built against rock walls. Men lounged in the shade or tended to tasks. All activity ceased as Sarah was led in every eye, assessing the newcomer. A tall figure emerged from the largest structure, a man whose presence commanded attention. His face was deeply scarred on one side, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. He wore a black duster despite the heat, and the pistols at his hips looked well used. "Mr. Voss," Durrell called out, touching his hat brim. "We brought the woman." So this was Caleb Voss, the man whose name inspired such fear in Clearwater. Sarah straightened as best she could with bound hands. "You'll get her down," Voss ordered. Rough hands seized Sarah, dragging her from the horse. Her legs, numb from the long ride, buckled beneath her. Laughter rippled through the watching men. "Stand her up," Voss commanded. Durrell and Jenks hauled Sarah to her feet. Voss circled her, slowly assessing her as one might a horse at auction. "So you're the wealthy widow from Boston," he said finally. "Not what I expected. I am not a widow." Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And whatever you've heard about my wealth, it's a lie." Voss smiled, a chilling expression that never reached his eyes. "That's not what my sources tell me. They say you brought enough money west to save the Crawford family business. Herbert Crawford lured me here under false pretenses. His family took what little I had. A touching story." Voss lifted her chin with one finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. But it changes nothing. If you have no money, the Crawfords will pay to get you back, if only to keep their respectable reputation intact. They were planning to put me on the eastbound train. They want nothing to do with me." Voss's smile widened. "We'll see. In the meantime, you'll be our guest." He turned to Darrell. "Put her in the back shelter. Post a guard." As they led her away, Voss called after them. "And bring her trunk to my quarters. I want to see what treasures our guest has brought." The thought of this man pawing through her possessions, holding the child's dress with his blood-stained hands, filled Sarah with rage so intense it momentarily eclipsed her fear. Darrell shoved her into a small shelter constructed of canvas and wooden poles against the canyon wall. The space was bare, except for a thin pallet on the ground and a bucket in the corner. "Home, sweet home," Darrell mocked before cutting the ropes binding her wrists and backing out, securing the canvas flap behind him. Alone, Sarah sank onto the pallet, her body trembling with exhaustion, fear, and anger. She examined her wrists rubbed raw from the ropes and tried to think. There had to be a way out of this situation. Sarah assessed her surroundings. The shelter was secure, the canvas thick. The only opening was the guarded front flap. She moved to the back of the shelter where the canvas met the canyon wall. There was a small gap not large enough to squeeze through, but large enough to see through. From this vantage point, she could see part of the camp, including the entrance to Voss's quarters. As she watched, Darrell and Jenks carried her trunk inside. Minutes later, Voss emerged holding something in his hands, the child's dress, its tiny white form stark against his black clothing. He called over one of his men and showed him the dress. The man laughed, and Voss joined in, tossing the precious garment carelessly to the ground before returning to his quarters. Sarah backed away from the gap, her hands covering her mouth to stifle her sobs. That dress represented her last connection to the child she had lost. To see it treated with such disregard broke something inside her, but as grief passed, it left behind something harder: determination. These men had taken her freedom and possessions. They mocked her deepest pain, but they had not yet taken her life or her will to survive. She returned to the gap and continued observing, mentally mapping the camp's layout, noting guards' routines, searching for weaknesses. If Swift Owl came for her, and something told her he would, she wanted to be ready. As the day wore on, Sarah noticed another presence in the camp. A boy no more than 12 or 13, darting between shelters performing menial tasks. Unlike the men who were all white, the boy appeared to be of mixed heritage. His skin copper-toned, his straight black hair framing a face that held both native and European features. The men ordered him about, roughly cuffing him when he wasn't quick enough. When the afternoon heat reached its peak and the camp grew quieter, the canvas flap to Sarah's prison suddenly pulled aside. The boy entered carrying a wooden plate with bread and dried meat, along with a cup of water. "Mr. Voss says you're to eat," the boy said, setting the items down without meeting her eyes. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Thomas." "I'm Sarah." "How did you come to be here, Thomas?" His eyes flicked to the entrance, ensuring no one was listening. "They took me after they killed my pa. Ma was Shoshone. Pa was a trapper. Voss said I could be useful as a scout. You're a prisoner like me." Thomas shrugged with a casualness that didn't reach his eyes. "Been here 3 years now. Ain't no different than anywhere else for someone like me." Sarah's heart ached for this child, who had already learned to expect so little from life. "Do you ever think of escaping?" Fear flashed across his features. "You shouldn't talk like that. I won't endanger you," Sarah assured him quickly. "I just wondered if it's possible to leave this place." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "There are ways through the canyons that even Voss doesn't know. My ma's people showed me when I was little. But a white woman alone wouldn't last a day out there." "What if I wasn't alone?" Sarah asked, thinking of Swift Owl. A harsh voice called from outside. "Boy, what's taking so long?" "Coming," Thomas called back. At the last moment, he turned to Sarah. The Shoshone are the best trackers in these parts. If someone's coming for you, pray it's them." With that cryptic statement, he slipped out, leaving Sarah to wonder if he somehow knew about Swift Owl's promise to help her. The rest of the day passed slowly, the heat inside the canvas shelter becoming nearly unbearable. Sarah continued her vigil at the gap, watching and listening. She learned that a small group would leave at dawn for a supply run. She heard fragments about a planned raid on a stagecoach carrying a military payroll. And most disturbingly, she overheard Voss discussing her ransom. "Crawford won't pay," a bearded man argued. "Not from what I've heard about how they treated her." "He'll pay," Voss replied confidently. "Not out of concern for her, but out of fear. I know things about the Crawfords that would destroy them in polite society." "And if he doesn't?" Voss's laugh sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Then we still have use for her. The Shoshone have been causing trouble for my operations in the northern canyons. They consider those lands sacred burial grounds. Having a white woman hostage might persuade them to back down. You think the Injuns care what happens to a white woman? And one of them already does," Voss said smugly. "My sources in Clearwater say Swift Owl himself was asking about her disappearance." The bearded man whistled. "Swift Owl's got a reputation. They say he tracked the men who killed his daughter halfway across the territory." "All the better," Voss replied. "I've wanted to eliminate that particular thorn in my side for some time. If he comes looking for the woman, he'll be walking into a trap." Sarah backed away from the gap, her mind racing. Swift Owl was coming for her, riding straight into danger. Worse, Voss seemed to be planning to use her as bait in multiple schemes. As darkness fell, the camp grew quieter. She heard the guard outside her shelter being changed. She lay on the pallet pretending sleep while her mind worked furiously on a plan. Thomas was her best hope, a potential ally who knew the canyons and might help her if she could convince him it was safe. But how to communicate without raising suspicion? The answer came to her as she drifted into uneasy sleep, the one thing these rough men would never suspect: compassion. Swift Owl and his band of warriors moved through the night like shadows, their knowledge of the land allowing them to make progress even in darkness. 15 Shoshone warriors followed the trail with grim determination. During a brief rest to water the horses, White Fox approached Swift Owl. "We're getting close to Voss's territory. His scouts will be watching all the main approaches." Swift Owl nodded, studying the stars. "We will not take the main approaches. There is another way through Shadow Canyon." Several warriors exchanged glances. Shadow Canyon was known to them all, a treacherous passage so narrow in places that horses could barely pass single file, with sheer walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. A death trap if one encountered enemies there. Voss would expect no one to be so foolish. Swift Owl continued. "That is why we must do it." Gray Hawk spoke up. "Shadow Canyon has many exits. Choosing the wrong one could put us miles from Voss's camp." Swift Owl reached into his pouch and withdrew the tiny moccasin wrapped in buckskin. "I will ask the spirits to guide us to the woman. Such connections are not formed by chance." They mounted and continued, reaching the entrance to Shadow Canyon just before dawn. As first light began to color the eastern sky, they paused to prepare. Weapons were checked, prayers offered, plans reviewed. "Once we emerge," Swift Owl instructed, "we separate into 3 groups. Gray Hawk leads 5 warriors to the high ground for covering fire. White Fox and his brothers circle to the south as a blocking force. I take the remaining warriors directly to their camp." "How will we find the woman?" Running River asked. "In a camp of men, there will be only one shelter guarded day and night." With that, they entered Shadow Canyon, moving in single file. The passage was treacherous, narrow with loose stones that could cause a horse to stumble. In places, they were forced to dismount and lead their horses through gaps barely wide enough for man or beast. Halfway through, White Fox raised his hand for a halt, He pointed to fresh tracks in a patch of sand boot prints heading deeper into the canyon. Swift Owl dismounted to examine them. One man moving quickly, a scout, a messenger. We must catch him before he can warn others, Swift Owl said quietly. White Fox nodded and slipped from his horse, moving ahead with silent grace. The others waited as growing daylight illuminated the towering walls. White Fox returned as silently as he had departed. A messenger heading to Bitter Creek with letters. I took care of him. No one asked for details. They continued on, emerging from Shadow Canyon into a broader valley as the sun cleared the eastern rim. Here, they separated into 3 groups as planned. As Swift Owl led his small band toward Voss's camp, he found his thoughts returning to Sarah Fleming. There had been something in her eyes when she spoke of her lost child that had resonated within him, a pain that mirrored his own, a strength that refused to be broken by grief. From a ridge overlooking the canyon containing Voss's camp, Swift Owl surveyed the layout below. Just as predicted, there was one shelter with a guard, posted a canvas structure near the rear of the camp. Most bandits were still asleep, with only a few moving about in the early morning light. There, he said, pointing. That's where they keep her. Running River studied the camp. 20 men at least, more than expected. The numbers mean nothing in the first moments of surprise, Swift Owl replied. We wait for Greyhawk's signal. They didn't wait long. From the high ridge came the call of a hawk 3 times, and silence. Greyhawk and his warriors were in position. Now we wait for White Fox, Swift Owl said. Minutes stretched. The camp below stirred more actively. Men emerged from shelters building fire pits for morning meals. The guard at Sarah's shelter was changed. Still no signal came. Something is wrong, Running River murmured. They should be in position. From the direction White Fox should have taken came the sound that explained the delay gunshots in rapid succession. They've been discovered, Swift Owl said grimly. We move now before Voss realizes what is happening. They descended toward the camp, no longer concerned with stealth. The element of surprise was gone. Speed was now their only advantage. As they approached, the first alarm was raised a shout from a sentry cut short by an arrow from Greyhawk's position. The camp erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons. Voss emerged from his shelter pistols, drawn barking orders to form a defensive line. Swift Owl and his warriors charged, firing arrows as they rode. In the initial confusion, several of Voss's men fell before they could mount an effective defense. But the bandits were experienced fighters and quickly recovered, taking cover behind barrels, crates, and the corners of shelters, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The air filled with the crack of pistols and rifles, the hiss of arrows, and the shouts of men in combat. The scent of gunpowder hung thick in the air as dust kicked up by horses and fighting men clouded visibility. A bullet whizzed past Swift Owl's ear as he drove his horse directly toward Sarah's shelter, determination overriding caution. Greyhawk's archers rained arrows from their elevated position, forcing Voss's men to keep their heads down. But their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Swift Owl knew they had precious little time before their numerical disadvantage became insurmountable. Through the chaos, Swift Owl spotted a small figure darting between structures and the half-Shoshone boy he had glimpsed earlier. The child moved with surprising purpose, using the battle's confusion to his advantage as he slipped toward Sarah's shelter. The guard at the entrance turned, raising his pistol to fire at the approaching boy. Swift Owl pulled his bow in one fluid motion and loosed an arrow that struck the guard in the shoulder, sending his shot wild. The man staggered back, clutching his wound. Swift Owl leapt from his horse knife in hand and raced toward the shelter. The wounded guard tried to aim again, but a second arrow from Greyhawk's position took him in the chest. He collapsed as Swift Owl reached the shelter's entrance. Inside, Swift Owl found the boy already cutting Sarah's bonds, speaking urgently. Through the back. There's a gap. Hurry before they... The boy broke off as Swift Owl entered his young face, freezing in terror. Sarah looked up, her eyes widening in recognition and relief. Swift Owl, you came, as I promised. he replied, moving quickly to her side. But we must leave now. The fight goes against us. Outside, the sounds of battle were shifting. Running River's shouts indicated their warriors were being forced to fall back. Voss's men were regrouping, their superior numbers beginning to tell. The boy comes with us, Sarah said firmly, taking Thomas's hand. He helped me. They'll kill him if we leave him. Swift Owl assessed the boy with a quick glance. Thomas stood straight under his scrutiny, fear in his eyes, but determination in his stance. Stay close, he directed. Thomas, is there another way out of this camp? Thomas nodded, pointing to the back of the shelter. Behind these rocks is a narrow path that leads to Shadow Canyon. The bandits don't use it, too easy to get lost if you don't know the way. You know this path well. My mother showed me all the secret ways through these canyons before she died. Swift Owl made his decision. Then you will guide us. He turned to the shelter entrance, peering out cautiously. The battle had moved to the eastern side of the camp, drawing attention away from them. Now, he said, leading them around the back of the shelter. True to Thomas's word, there was a gap in the rocks that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it. They had almost reached it when a voice called out behind them. Leaving so soon, Swift Owl without saying goodbye, they turned to find Caleb Voss standing 20 paces away. A rifle aimed steadily at Swift Owl's chest. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and cold as winter ice. I've waited a long time for this. Voss continued, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. The great Shoshone warrior, finally in my sights. Swift Owl pushed Sarah and Thomas behind him, never taking his eyes off Voss. You have lost many men today, Voss. More will die if you continue this fight. Voss laughed. My men are driving yours back even now. Soon this canyon will be filled with nothing but Shoshone corpses. His gaze shifted to Sarah. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Mrs. Fleming. I had plans for you. Your plans mean nothing to me. Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Just as Herbert Crawford's meant nothing. The brave words from a woman with nowhere to go. Voss's gaze moved to Thomas, his expression darkening. And you, boy. I should have known you'd betray me at the first opportunity. Your mother was just as treacherous. Thomas stiffened beside Sarah. She could feel the tension in his small frame, years of fear and resentment suddenly brought to the surface by Voss's taunting. You killed my father. Thomas said, his voice surprisingly steady. You said my mother abandoned me. But she didn't, did she? You killed her too. Something flickered in Voss's eyes, a moment of uncertainty quickly masked. Smart boy. Too smart for your own good. In that split second of distraction, a gunshot exploded from behind Voss. The bandit leader jerked forward, a look of shock crossing his face. Blood blossomed on his shoulder. He turned wildly to see Jenks standing there, smoke still curling from his pistol barrel. Jenks, Voss gasped disbelief, warring with rage. You! Now, Swift Owl commanded, pushing Sarah and Thomas toward the hidden path. They scrambled through the gap in the rocks as Voss recovered enough to fire his pistol one-handed. The bullet struck stone, sending fragments flying. Behind them came the sound of another gunshot, Jenks firing again, followed by a scream of pain. Run! Jenks shouted from behind them. I'll hold him. The path twisted between towering sandstone walls, barely wide enough for them to pass single file. Thomas led the way, his small feet sure on the treacherous ground. Sarah followed, her torn dress catching on rocky outcroppings, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Swift Owl brought up the rear, pausing occasionally to listen for pursuit. More gunfire echoed through the canyon, one shot, then several in rapid succession, then silence. Jenks. Sarah gasped. Why did he help us? Later, Swift Owl urged. We must put distance between us and Voss's men. They ran until Sarah's lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. Behind them, they could hear shouts as pursuers discovered the hidden path. Thomas led them into a small crevice in the canyon wall that opened into a cave just large enough for the three of them to crouch. "They'll pass by," Thomas whispered. "Most of them don't know these side paths." As they caught their breath, Swift Owl examined a deep scrape on Thomas's arm, binding it with a strip of cloth torn from his shirt. Sarah leaned against the cool stone wall, her mind reeling from the morning's events. Outside their hiding place, they could hear Voss's men searching their voices, growing fainter as they moved deeper into the canyon, following the false trail Thomas had cunningly led them down before ducking into the crevice. "How did you know to come?" Sarah asked Swift Owl when the voices had faded completely. "I promised I would return at dawn," he replied simply. "When you were gone, the trail was clear." "But why would Jenks help us? He's one of Voss's men." Swift Owl's expression darkened. "We will not know until we find him if he lives." Thomas had been listening silently, his young face far too serious for his years. Now he spoke up. "Jenks isn't like the others. He was kind to me sometimes. Gave me extra food when no one was looking. Once he stopped Durrell from beating me when I spilled water. A bandit with a conscience," Sarah wondered aloud. "Perhaps," Swift Owl said. "Or perhaps something more." They rested until Thomas deemed it safe to move. The boy led them through a bewildering maze of narrow passages that seemed to double back on themselves repeatedly. Swift Owl, despite his intimate knowledge of the region, admitted he would have been hopelessly lost without the boy's guidance. "How much farther to our meeting place?" Swift Owl asked as they paused by a small spring to drink. "Less than an hour if we're careful," Thomas replied. "But we can't go directly. Voss will have men watching all the main canyons by now." As if to confirm his words, a distant gunshot echoed through the canyons, followed by the war cry of a Shoshone warrior. "My people are still fighting," Swift Owl said grimly. "We must reach them." Thomas nodded, his face set with determination. "There's a way, but it's dangerous. We'll have to cross Hunter's Ledge." "What's Hunter's Ledge?" Sarah asked, not certain she wanted to know. "A narrow path along the canyon wall," Thomas explained. "Barely wide enough for one person, but it cuts the journey by half." Swift Owl considered the boy's eyes, searching for any deception. Finding none, he nodded. "Lead on." The path grew steeper as they climbed toward higher ground. Sarah's city-bred legs protested the ascent, but she pushed on without complaint. The sounds of skirmishes echoed occasionally through the canyons, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close. The battle had scattered into smaller conflicts throughout the labyrinth of stone. When they reached Hunter's Ledge, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. The path was barely 6 inches wide, in places a natural shelf along the face of a cliff that dropped hundreds of feet to jagged rocks below. Wind whistled across the exposed route, bringing with it the scent of sage and gunpowder. "I can't," she whispered, backing away from the edge. Swift Owl took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You can. I will be right behind you. Thomas will lead. Look only at his back, never down." Sarah swallowed hard. The alternative was to risk capture by Voss's men. With a nod, she steeled herself and followed Thomas onto the narrow ledge. Each step required complete concentration. The rock face offered few handholds, and loose stones occasionally skittered away under their feet, falling into the abyss below with tiny diminishing sounds that emphasized the deadly drop. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on Thomas's small back, drawing courage from the boy's steady progress. They were halfway across when a shot rang out, the bullet striking the cliff face inches from Sarah's head. Stone fragments stung her cheek. Below, on a parallel path, 2 of Voss's men had spotted them. One was reloading while the other took aim again. "They keep moving," Swift Owl commanded. "Do not stop." Thomas increased his pace, while Swift Owl pressed himself against the cliff face, drawing his knife, his bow and arrows, long since lost in the escape. The second shot went wide, echoing through the canyon. The shooter cursed and took more careful aim at Sarah's exposed position. In a move of breathtaking daring, Swift Owl launched his knife at the shooter just as the man squeezed his trigger. The blade struck the bandit's arm, spoiling his aim. The bullet chipped stone near Thomas's feet, causing the boy to stumble momentarily before regaining his balance. Now weaponless and exposed, Swift Owl urged them forward. "Run when you reach the end. Do not wait for me." Sarah wanted to protest, but arguing on the narrow ledge was impossible. She concentrated on placing one foot in front of the other as more shots rang out from below. The second bandit had drawn a pistol and was firing wildly, most shots going wide, but each one increasing the danger that the ledge itself might crumble. The path widened slightly as they neared the far side. Thomas reached solid ground and turned to help Sarah. As her foot left the ledge to step onto safer ground, a final shot echoed through the canyon. Sarah felt Swift Owl lurch behind her. Turning in horror, she saw blood spreading across his buckskin shirt from a wound in his side. "Swift Owl," she cried, reaching for him. "Go," he commanded through gritted teeth, pushing her toward Thomas. "I will follow." Swift Owl staggered onto solid ground as more shouts indicated additional bandits converging on their position. Thomas pulled urgently at Sarah's hand. "This way. There's a place we can hide." They supported Swift Owl between them, half dragging him toward a fissure in the rock that Thomas indicated. Swift Owl's breathing was labored, his face gray with pain, but he forced his legs to keep moving. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The fissure led to a small grotto concealed by overhanging brush. Inside, Swift Owl collapsed against the wall, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Let me see." Sarah insisted, gently moving his hand away. The bullet had torn through his side, a painful wound, but not immediately lethal if they could stop the bleeding. She tore strips from the hem of her dress to fashion a makeshift bandage. "They will find us soon," Swift Owl said weakly. "You must go with Thomas. He can lead you to safety." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah replied firmly, tightening the bandage. "I will only slow you down." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "There are no strangers in grief, only fellow travelers. Your words, Swift Owl. We travel together or not at all." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman. Look who's talking." She retorted, relief flooding through her as some color returned to his face. Thomas had been watching the entrance to their hiding place. Now he turned his expression urgent. "They're coming. We need to move deeper." The grotto extended further back than it first appeared, narrowing into a tunnel that twisted through the rock. Thomas led them through darkness with the confidence of familiarity, his small hand guiding Sarah, who in turn supported Swift Owl. The warrior moved under his own power now, though each step clearly caused him pain. After what seemed an eternity of darkness, they emerged onto a small plateau overlooking a broader canyon. In the distance, Sarah could see tiny figures moving, Shoshone warriors regrouping after the scattered battle. "Your people," she said to Swift Owl, pointing. He nodded, relief evident in his face. "Yes, but we are still far and there is open ground to cross. We'll wait until dark." Thomas decided with the confidence of someone accustomed to making survival decisions. Moving now would expose us. As they settled into the shelter of rocks to wait for nightfall, Swift Owl's strength seemed to be returning. The bleeding had slowed, and though he was clearly in pain, his eyes were alert and focused. Why did Jenks help us? Sarah wondered aloud, returning to the question that had puzzled her since their escape. He risked everything, probably his life. Swift Owl was silent for a long moment. "There was something familiar about him," he said finally. Something in his eyes when he looked at Thomas. Thomas looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Before Swift Owl could answer, the sound of dislodged stones came from the tunnel behind them. Someone was following their path. Swift Owl pushed himself to his feet, positioning himself protectively in front of Sarah and Thomas, despite his wound. A figure emerged from the tunnel, silhouetted against the darkness behind. Blood darkened one sleeve, and he moved with a pronounced limp, but the blue bandana around his neck was unmistakable. "Jenks," Sarah gasped. The man stepped forward, his hands raised to show he was no threat. His face was haggard with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear and fixed on Thomas. "You made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. Swift Owl did not relax his stance. "Why did you help us? Why betray your leader?" Jenks swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving Thomas. "Because some debts can't be ignored. Some sins can't be outrun." He took another step forward. "My real name is Jacob Redhawk. Thomas's mother was my sister." Thomas stared at him in shock. My uncle. But you're white." "Half," Jacob corrected gently. "Same as you. My father was Shoshone, my mother white. After she died, my father renamed me and raised me in the tribe. But I left when I was 16, thought I could find an easier life among white folks. Took my mother's surname Jenkins." "If Thomas is your nephew, why was he with Voss?" Sarah demanded. "Why didn't you help him sooner?" Pain crossed Jacob's face. "I didn't know at first. I joined Voss's gang 2 years ago after drifting from job to job. Thomas was already there. It wasn't until I heard him singing a Shoshone lullaby one night, the same one my sister used to sing to me, that I began to suspect. You could have taken him away." Swift Owl set his voice hard. "And go where?" Jacob asked bitterly. 2 half-breeds on the run, Voss would have tracked us down within days. I needed to wait for the right moment to have a plan." He looked at Thomas, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I tried to protect you as best I could." Thomas studied his newly discovered uncle, conflicting emotions playing across his young face. "You gave me extra blankets in winter," he said slowly. "And stopped Durrell from beating me that time." Jacob nodded. "I couldn't let you know we were kin. Voss would have used it against us both. But I've been planning saving money to get us out." Then Swift Owl's attack gave me the chance I'd been waiting for. Sarah turned to Swift Owl, whose expression remained guarded. "Do you believe him?" Swift Owl studied Jacob intently. There is truth in his eyes, but also many secrets. Jacob met his gaze unflinchingly. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Riding with Voss, I became someone my sister would be ashamed to call brother. But everything changed when I realized Thomas was her son." He turned to the boy. "I failed your mother in life. I won't fail her son." The tension hung in the air for several long moments. Then, to everyone's surprise, Thomas walked forward and took his uncle's hand. "Ma used to say everyone deserves a second path," the boy said quietly. Jacob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He squeezed Thomas's hand gently before turning back to Swift Owl and Sarah. "Voss is wounded but alive. He's gathering his remaining men for a final push against your warriors before darkness falls. They're planning to attack from the north where the canyon narrows." "How many men does he have left?" Swift Owl asked. "Maybe 15, but they're his best fighters. And he's desperate now. He knows his hold on these canyons is broken if he doesn't win today." Swift Owl nodded, decision made. "We must warn my people." He turned to Sarah. "The path ahead is dangerous. No more dangerous than staying behind," she replied firmly. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they made their way carefully down from the plateau. Jacob led his knowledge of Voss's patrol patterns, proving invaluable. Twice they had to hide as small groups of bandits passed nearby. The scattered fighting had largely ceased, both sides regrouping for what would clearly be a decisive confrontation. They were within sight of the Shoshone position when disaster struck. A sudden shout from behind indicated they'd been spotted. Jacob spun around, pushing Thomas toward Sarah. "Run," he commanded. "I'll hold them off." "No," Thomas cried, reaching for his uncle. Jacob met Swift Owl's eyes over the boy's head. A moment of understanding passed between them, one warrior to another, transcending the barriers of race and circumstance. "Keep him safe," Jacob said simply. Swift Owl nodded once. "You have my word." Gunfire erupted as they fled toward the Shoshone position. Greyhawk spotted them from his lookout post and sent warriors to guide them in. As they reached the safety of the Shoshone line, Sarah looked back to see Jacob taking cover behind rocks, exchanging fire with his former comrades. He had bought them the time they needed, but at what cost? The Shoshone camp was a scene of determined preparation. Warriors bound wounds, checked weapons, and positioned themselves to defend the narrow approach from the north. Women and older children had been sent to safety earlier, leaving only the warriors ready to make their final stand against Voss. White Fox, his arm bound in a bloodied sling, greeted Swift Owl with evident relief. "We feared you were lost, brother." They nearly Swift Owl admitted, allowing 2 warriors to help him to a seat by the small fire. "Voss comes with his remaining men before nightfall. We must be ready." Greyhawk approached his weathered face, grave. "We have few arrows left, and many wounded. If Voss comes in force, we will meet them here," Swift Owl said firmly. "This canyon has witnessed too much bloodshed. Let it end today one way or another." As the warriors prepared, Sarah sat with Thomas slightly apart. The boy's eyes kept straying to the distance, where occasional gunfire indicated Jacob was still fighting. "He'll be all right," Sarah said, trying to convince herself as much as Thomas. "He came back for me," Thomas said quietly. "After all this time." Sarah put her arm around his thin shoulders. "Family finds a way, Thomas. Sometimes it just takes longer than we expect." The sun touched the canyon rim, casting long shadows across the valley floor. In the fading light, Swift Owl gathered his warriors for final instructions. Though weakened by his wound, his presence still commanded respect, his voice steady and sure. "Voss believes us broken and scattered," he told them. "But we are Shoshone. Our ancestors watch from these sacred hills. Their strength flows through us." He gestured to the narrow canyon entrance, where Voss would soon appear. "Let them come. They will find not frightened prey, but warriors ready to defend their land." A shout from one of the lookouts interrupted the gathering. "Riders coming, many riders." The warriors rushed to their positions, bows drawn, rifles aimed. Sarah pulled Thomas behind the shelter of rocks, her heart pounding. This was it, the final confrontation. But the riders emerging from the canyon were not Voss and his men. Instead, a column of blue-uniformed cavalry soldiers appeared, led by an officer whose insignia identified him as a captain. Behind them, bound and disarmed, rode Voss and several of his men under heavy guard. And riding alongside the captain, his face grim but satisfied, was Jacob Redhawk. The Shoshone did not lower their weapons as the cavalry approached. Too many broken promises and betrayals made caution necessary even in this moment of apparent rescue. The captain raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm Captain James Miller, 2nd Cavalry, Fort Laramie. We're not here to fight. We're here for Caleb Voss and his gang." Swift Owl stepped forward, one hand pressed to his wounded side. "Why has the Army suddenly developed interest in Voss? His crimes against my people have gone unpunished for years." "Not just your people, Chief," Miller replied. "We've had orders from the territorial governor himself. Seems Voss and his associates have been involved in a conspiracy that reaches all the way to Clearwater." Sarah moved to stand beside Swift Owl, her eyes seeking out Jacob among the riders. He nodded to her, almost imperceptibly. "The Crawfords," she said, understanding dawning. "They're involved with Voss." "Yes, ma'am," Captain Miller confirmed. "Mayor Crawford and his son Herbert are already in custody. This man," he gestured to Jacob, "rode into our patrol with evidence of the conspiracy and guided us here just in time, it seems." Voss, his face contorted with fury, spat on the ground. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts. The army can't patrol these canyons forever, and the Crawfords have friends in high places." "Not anymore," Miller replied coldly. "The governor has taken a personal interest in this case. Something about illegal mining, claims on protected Shoshone land kidnapping, and attempted murder." As the tension gradually eased, the full story emerged. Jacob had been planning his escape from Voss's gang for months, collecting evidence of the conspiracy between Voss and the Crawfords. When he recognized his sister's son among the captives, his resolve hardened. Sarah's kidnapping provided the catalyst he needed, and Swift Owl's attack gave him the opportunity to act. After helping them escape, Jacob had fought a rearguard action against Voss's men before breaking away to intercept a cavalry patrol he knew would be passing near the northern canyons. With the evidence, he carried letters between Voss and Mayor Crawford, detailing their plan to drive the Shoshone from their sacred burial grounds to access gold deposits. He convinced Captain Miller to mount an immediate expedition to capture Voss. The Crawfords wanted the gold, but needed someone to remove the Shoshone obstacle. Jacob explained as they sat around the fire that evening, the cavalry and Shoshone in an uneasy but peaceful coexistence. Voss was perfect for the job, ruthless, familiar with the territory, and willing to do anything for the right price. "And my part in all this?" Sarah asked. "Why lure me from Boston?" Jacob glanced at Voss, who sat under guard nearby. "Tell her," he commanded his former leader. "She deserves to know." Voss looked up, his scarred face shadowed in the firelight. Herbert Crawford needed money to finance the operation. Marrying a wealthy widow and then disposing of her seemed the easiest solution. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Only you weren't wealthy enough, were you? And then you became inconvenient, a loose end who knew too much. So you kidnapped me to silence me or for ransom?" "Both," Voss admitted coldly. "If the Crawfords paid to get you back, fine. If not, you'd have had an unfortunate accident in these dangerous canyons. Either way, you'd never tell your story." Sarah shuddered at the casual way he discussed her planned murder. Swift Owl moved closer to her, his presence steadying. "But there's more." Jacob said, his expression grim. "Tell them about Morningstar, Voss." Swift Owl tensed beside Sarah. "My daughter. What does he know of her?" Voss's eyes narrowed calculatingly. "Maybe I know something, maybe I don't. Might be worth something to you, Shoshone." Swift Owl started forward, but Captain Miller intervened. "Speak, Voss. You're facing a hanging either way. Maybe cooperation will earn you a cell instead of a rope." Voss considered this, then shrugged. "I wasn't here 5 years ago when your daughter died. That was William Crawford's doing, the mayor's brother." "The William Crawford?" Swift Owl repeated, shock evident in his voice. "He led a group of vigilantes targeting Indians and those who dealt with them. Called themselves the Purifiers. Mayor Crawford used his influence to cover up their activities." Voss's smile was cold. "The Crawford brothers don't like competition in their territory. When your daughter married a white trader who was cutting into their business, William decided to make an example of them." Sarah watched the blood drain from Swift Owl's face as the truth he had sought for 5 years was finally revealed. She reached for his hand, offering what comfort she could as he absorbed this terrible knowledge. "Why did Mayor Crawford bring you in if his brother was already doing his dirty work?" Captain Miller asked Voss. "Because William got himself killed in a card game 2 years back. Crawford needed new muscle." Voss laughed bitterly. The respectable mayor of Clearwater, pillar of society, using bandits to do what his brother's vigilantes once handled. There's irony for you. As night deepened, the camp gradually quieted. The cavalry posted guards around Voss and his captured men, while the Shoshone maintained their own watch. Sarah found Swift Owl sitting alone at the edge of camp, staring at the stars. "I have hunted the wrong man for 5 years," he said without turning as she approached. Wasted 5 years seeking vengeance against Voss when William Crawford was truly responsible. "You couldn't have known," Sarah said gently, sitting beside him. "I should have looked deeper, asked more questions." His voice was heavy with regret. "And now William Crawford is beyond justice, dead in some meaningless gunfight." "But his brother isn't," Sarah pointed out. "Mayor Crawford protected William, used his influence to hide his crimes. He shares the guilt for your daughter's death." Swift Owl was silent for a long moment. "Vengeance has been my purpose for so long. Without it, what remains?" Sarah took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Life remains. The future remains." She hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps even hope." He turned to look at her, then his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "You speak of hope after all that has happened to you?" "I do." Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew the packet of morning glory seeds Thomas had given her, seeds his mother had carried as a symbol of dormant hope. Sometimes, hope sleeps through winter, waiting for the right conditions to grow. Swift Owl covered her hand with his, the seeds nestled between their palms. "You are a remarkable woman, Sarah Fleming. And you are a remarkable man, Swift Owl. One who deserves peace after so much pain." The journey back to civilization began at dawn. The cavalry would escort Voss and his men to Fort Laramie to face justice, while Swift Owl and his warriors would return to their encampment to bring news of the victory to their people. The question of Sarah's destination was resolved without debate. She would accompany Swift Owl and Thomas. Jacob Redhawk granted clemency in exchange for his testimony against Voss, and the Crawfords would join them. Captain Miller approached as they prepared to part ways. "The governor will want statements from all of you," he informed them. "And there's the matter of the sacred grounds. With evidence of the Crawfords' conspiracy to violate the treaty, the governor is inclined to establish formal protection for those lands." "Words on paper have not protected my people before," Swift Owl replied skeptically. "These will be different," Miller assured him. "The governor is facing re-election. A public scandal involving prominent citizens conspiring against federal treaties is the last thing he wants. Making an example of the Crawfords and establishing permanent boundaries for your sacred lands gives him a political victory he badly needs." Politics made strange allies, Sarah reflected, as they rode toward the Shoshone encampment. The very forces that had often worked against native rights were now, through a peculiar alignment of interests, working to protect them. 3 days later, Sarah stood beside Swift Owl at the edge of the sacred grounds. The meadow stretched between forested slopes dotted with stone cairns and wooden burial platforms. At the far end, a clear stream flowed into a small lake that reflected the sky like polished silver. It was a place of profound serenity. "This is where your daughter rests?" she asked softly. Swift Owl nodded. "And my wife, and generations of my people." He gestured toward the stream. "Our traditions teach that water carries messages to the spirit world. Each spring, I come here to speak to them." Sarah knelt and opened her hand, revealing the morning glory seeds. "May I?" At his nod, she carefully planted several seeds along the stream's edge, pressing them into the rich soil. "In Boston, these bloom in late summer," she said as she worked. "Blue-purple flowers that open with the morning sun and close at dusk. Like hope awakening each day," Swift Owl observed. "Yes, exactly like that." In the week that followed, decisions about the future took shape. Jacob and Thomas would stay with the tribe, reconnecting with their Shoshone heritage, while maintaining ties to the white world. Swift Owl's sister, Running Water, welcomed Sarah to her trading post with surprising warmth, recognizing in this Eastern woman a strength and adaptability that would serve her well in the challenging life ahead. Word came from Fort Laramie that both Jefferson and Herbert Crawford had been convicted of conspiracy fraud and treaty violations. Their sentencing would take place in Cheyenne, where the territorial governor could make a public example of them. Sarah's property, including her savings, had been recovered and would be returned to her. On a warm evening, a month after their escape from Voss's camp, Sarah sat on the porch of the trading post, watching Thomas and Jacob practice archery under Greyhawk's patient instruction. Running water worked nearby, sorting herbs she had gathered earlier in the day. Swift Owl approached his wound, now healed enough that he moved without pain. He sat beside Sarah, following her gaze to where Thomas was celebrating a successful shot. "The boy improves quickly," he commented. "He has good teachers." Sarah smiled. "And for the first time in years, he has safety belonging." "And you?" Swift Owl asked quietly. "Have you found belonging here?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I came west seeking a new beginning, though not the one I found. I lost everything I thought I wanted, but gained something I never expected." She turned to face him directly. "Yes, I have found belonging. More than I ever had in Boston." Swift Owl's expression softened. "My people have a saying. Sometimes the trail takes us where we need to go, not where we thought we were going. Wise people, the Shoshone." Sarah replied with a small smile. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. From the direction of the stream came Thomas's excited shout, "Sarah, Swift Owl, come quick." They hurried to the water's edge, where Thomas stood pointing at the ground. There, pushing through the soil where Sarah had planted them, came the first green shoots of the morning glory seeds. Tiny, fragile stems reaching toward the sunlight, carrying the promise of blossoms to come. "They're growing," Thomas exclaimed, his face alight with wonder. "Just like Ma said they would." Sarah knelt beside the tender shoots, touching one gently with her fingertip. "They're stronger than they look. These will climb and spread, and by late summer the whole bank will be covered in flowers." Swift Owl watched her, seeing not just a woman tending plants, but someone nurturing hope itself back to life. In Sarah's careful attention to these fragile beginnings, he recognized the same determination that had brought her through abandonment, kidnapping, and danger with her spirit intact. "Life finds a way," he said softly, "even in the harshest places." Thomas looked up at him, wisdom beyond his years in his young eyes. "That's what Ma always said. That's why she carried the seeds everywhere we went." As twilight deepened around them, they walked back to the trading post together. The evening air carried the scent of pine and sage, mingled with the smoke from cooking fires. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the rising moon, its voice echoing off canyon walls. Sarah realized with a start that she now thought of this place as home. Not the buildings or even the land itself, but this circle of people who had risked everything to save her and whom she had come to care for deeply in return. 2 months later, as summer reached its zenith, Sarah stood at the edge of what was now officially designated as Shoshone Sacred Land. Governor Brooks himself had traveled from Cheyenne for the ceremony, bringing with him the signed treaty amendments that would protect these grounds in perpetuity. The morning glories had flourished beyond all expectation, their vines climbing over rocks and along the stream bank, blue-purple blossoms opening to greet the dawn. Swift Owl had told her that many in the tribe now saw them as a sign, a bridge between worlds, much like Sarah herself had become. Using her recovered funds, Sarah had established a small school near the trading post, where both Shoshone and settler children gathered to learn. The Territorial Education Office had been surprisingly supportive, recognizing the political advantages of showcasing peaceful cooperation between cultures. "Quite a transformation," a familiar voice observed. Sarah turned to find Agent Collins, the Indian agent from Fort Laramie, standing nearby. He had become an unexpected ally in the weeks following Voss's capture, advocating forcefully for Shoshone rights with his superiors. "The flowers or the politics?" Sarah asked with a smile. "Both." Collins gestured toward where Governor Brooks was engaged in conversation with Swift Owl and the tribal elders. 6 months ago, that meeting would have been unimaginable. But nothing creates strange bedfellows quite like a common enemy. The Crawfords. Collins nodded. Their trial was quite the spectacle. 20 years hard labor for Jefferson, 15 for Herbert. The territorial papers are calling it justice long overdue for the frontier. And Voss, hanging scheduled for next month. Collins studied her face. Does that trouble you? Sarah considered the question. I take no joy in any man's death, but Voss earned his fate. How many others did he kill before we stopped him? How many families destroyed? True enough. Collins turned his attention to where Thomas and several other children were playing near the stream. And the boy, how was he adjusting? Better than anyone expected. Having Jacob here helps. He's the last connection to Thomas's mother. And Swift Owl has become... Sarah hesitated, searching for the right word. A father figure, Collins suggested. Yes, Sarah admitted. For both of us in different ways. Collins smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. This came for you. From Boston. Sarah accepted it with surprise. Few people in her former life knew where she had gone after the Clearwater disaster. Opening it, she found a letter from her former housekeeper, along with news clippings about the Crawford scandal that had apparently reached even Massachusetts papers. Everything all right? Collins asked, noting her expression. Yes, Sarah replied, folding the letter carefully. Just echoes from another life, one that seems very far away now. As Collins moved to join the official gathering, Sarah wandered toward the edge of the sacred grounds, where Swift Owl stood alone, having stepped away from the political discussions for a moment of peace. Tired of diplomacy? She asked, joining him. Words tire me more than battle sometimes. He admitted with the ghost of a smile. But they are necessary weapons in this new world we face. A world where morning glories can grow beside ancient burial grounds, Sarah observed. Where children of different worlds can learn together. Swift Owl turned to face her fully. A world where a Boston schoolmistress and a Shoshone warrior can find common ground. More than common ground, Sarah said softly. A common purpose, a common... The heart Swift Owl finished when she hesitated. Yes. He took her hand, and then a gesture that would have scandalized Clearwater society, but seemed the most natural thing in the world here by the sacred waters. My people have a tradition, he explained. When two souls recognize each other across the divisions of world and time, they must walk together or risk losing their way entirely. Is that a Shoshone proposal? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. It is my proposal, Swift Owl replied. Not as a Shoshone to a white woman, but as a man who has found in you the courage to live again, rather than merely survive. His dark eyes held hers. My daughter would have called you mother. My wife would have called you sister. I would call you heart of my heart if you are willing. Sarah thought of all she had lost and found on this journey west, the false promises that had led her to Wyoming, the cruel rejection, the terror of captivity. And then, the unexpected gifts, Thomas's innocent wisdom, Jacob's redemption, the community that had embraced her despite every difference. And most precious of all, this man before her, a man whose grief had matched her own, whose courage had saved her life, whose quiet strength had helped her find her own power again. I am willing, she said simply. More than willing. Their union was celebrated twice, first in the Shoshone tradition at the sacred grounds, with prayers offered to the spirits of Swift Owl's ancestors. And later, in a simple ceremony, performed by a traveling preacher who saw in their love something that transcended his initial misgivings. Thomas stood proudly at their side in both ceremonies, a living bridge between the worlds they were joining. And when Agent Collins arrived with the governor's delegation to formally establish the protected status of the sacred grounds, he brought with him papers recognizing Thomas as their legal ward, a family made official in the eyes of the territorial government. 5 years later, Sarah stood on the porch of the home she and Swift Owl had built near the trading post, watching as summer rain nourished the lush garden that surrounded their dwelling. Morning glories climbed trellises and fences, their vibrant blooms standing out against the greenery. The school she had established had grown, drawing students from both nearby settlements and the Shoshone tribe. Her methods were unconventional, combining traditional Western education with Shoshone knowledge of the land and its history. But the results spoke for themselves. Children left her classroom equipped to navigate both worlds, carrying with them the seeds of understanding that might in time grow into lasting peace. Thomas, now 17, had become her assistant at the school, his natural gift for languages making him invaluable as more settlers moved into the region. Jacob had settled into life as the trading post's manager, his understanding of both cultures helping to build bridges where once there had been only suspicion and fear. Swift Owl emerged from the house, a letter in his hand. "News from Cheyenne," he said, joining her on the porch. "Governor Brooks has appointed a new Indian agent for our region, someone who understands our ways." "Who?" Sarah asked, curious. "Greyhawk's son, Joseph. He studied law in the East, but returned to help his people. The governor believes appointing him will demonstrate commitment to honoring our treaty." Sarah smiled. "Progress comes in small steps, but it comes." Swift Owl nodded his gaze, moving to the horizon where storm clouds were beginning to clear, allowing rays of sunlight to break through. 5 years ago, I would not have believed such change possible. I saw only darkness ahead for my people. And now, he took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Now I see that even the longest night ends. Dawn always returns." His eyes moved to the garden where morning glories climbed toward the sky with persistent determination. "Like those flowers you planted, finding life in unlikely places, creating beauty where once there was only barren ground." Sarah leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They had faced challenges together, resistance from both communities to their union, continuing threats from those who coveted Shoshone lands, the personal struggle of blending different traditions into a shared life. But through it all, they had found in each other not just love, but a partnership that made them both stronger. "Do you ever regret it?" Swift Owl asked suddenly. "Coming west, all that you endured?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain mine and others. I regret that Herbert Crawford's deception led to suffering for so many." She shook her head slowly. "But regret the journey that brought me here to this life, this family we've made never." From inside the house came Thomas's voice, calling them to dinner. The summer rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the world washed clean and glistening in the evening light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to face. But tonight, in this moment, Sarah knew a contentment that transcended the boundaries of culture and circumstance. As they turned to go inside, she paused to look once more at the morning glories, their blossoms closing as dusk approached, storing their strength for another dawn, another day of reaching toward the light. In their simple persistence, she recognized her own journey from grief to hope, from isolation to community, from loss to a love that had found her when she least expected it. "Come," Swift Owl said gently. "Our family waits." Sarah smiled and followed him inside, carrying with her the knowledge that sometimes the greatest journeys are not those that take us to new places, but those that lead us home to where we truly belong.